Welcome to my second lesson on making asteroids in Unity. This entire lesson is going to cover, so this is spanning about 5 or 6 videos. We're going to talk about setting up a background image, adjusting the lighting, getting particle effects working on the player, getting dynamic lights working on the player, and then setting up the ability to implement screen wrapping, which means when you go off one edge of the screen, you appear on the other edge. So this video is going to focus specifically on lighting. And so we're going to look at the types of lights available in Unity and set up some kind of default lighting for the player. And so with that, we can start taking a look at some of the settings on here. So we have a basic directional light already in existence, but we could probably make our lighting look a little bit more space themed. And so let's kind of take a look at what these settings do relative to what our game looks like. So here's our game, and what you can tell is that the light is coming from, basically, it appears like the bottom edge of the screen, and it's creating dynamic shadows on the player. But we can have more lights, and we can definitely play with how that light works. So first off, if we want to think about how the screen is working for what the camera sees, we are looking at it top down on the y-axis, and so we can then set our view to mimic that type of camera by clicking on the green part of the view gizmo, and you can see that that sets a kind of a straight down view. But be careful, because when you do that, if you use the right mouse to look around, it breaks you out of that view. Now, if you lose things completely, if you double click on the player, it will refocus on the player. So if your camera gets completely lost, you can do that to kind of get back into things. So if I'm looking at it from a top-down standpoint, this is actually one of the uses of the hand tool. We can use it to pan the camera to look at the scene. So we can then focus on what's actually going on with this directional light. And unfortunately, it's kind of hard to see through the icon, but you can actually see the direction the light is casting through the icon here. You can see the rays of light are kind of coming from the bottom right of the screen, and that's why the lighting looks the way it does. A directional light, which is the type of light that this is, illuminates the entire screen regardless of its location. It can be best thought of as how sunlight works. Anything exposed to the open air is hit by this and illuminated by this. So since there's nothing in my world, no walls, nothing blocking anything, this light is going to hit everything inside of the game world. And so if we were to rotate it, so if we select the directional light and turn on the rotation tool, rotating it changes the angle that the light is going to be hitting things from. So as you can see, if I have it coming up from the bottom of this stage, how unnatural that ends up looking, but the lower part of the ship would be illuminated. I don't think that's really what we want, though. Back up on top of everything. So we definitely don't want to have this type of rotation. Now, if we've messed this light up, we can try to reset its rotation by right-clicking on the transform and going back to reset rotation. That still didn't do a very good job, but we could still use this light sphere to eventually rotate it back to something that we normally had. And so that gives us some control over it. And also the position doesn't matter. So where this light actually is, if I were to move it using the move tool, you can see that no matter where I put the light, it doesn't matter, because the directional light is just, it's coming from the certain angle off screen, and so the actual location of this light object does not matter. But let's kind of set up a couple lights to create an interesting dynamic on the ship and to see what this would look like. And if we look, you can also tell that if we turn this light off, there is no light in the scene. So the ship would be completely black. Some of that is covered under the rendering lighting option. And so some of this does control the unlit light settings. But as you can see, we're pretty much completely dark if there is no light. And I don't think we have any ambient light set up. But this really isn't too terribly much worth messing with, but you could look at it if you think you want to play with how light actually interacts with all the different elements. I bet if we switch this back to skybox, no, there's still no light. Alright, so let's set this light to some settings that might look good, and then also put a few more lights into the level that give it a little bit more dimension. So for this light, let's set it back to, I'm going to put it at 0, 0, 0 because I want to group these lights together. And so I've set the position to 0, 0, 0, and then I'm going to right click into the hierarchy and create an empty object. And it just calls it game object, but gives it a weird position. I'm going to reset that position, and it goes back to 0, 0, 0. And I'm going to rename it from game object to stage lights. And so this is a grouping object so that I can group all of my lights under this one object to make it easier to deal with. So I'm going to take my directional light and drag and drop it so that the cursor is highlighting stage lights, not so that it's under it so that a line appears, but on top of the object like this. And we've made our first child object, meaning if I move the parent of stage lights up, so like I could set its Y position to 10, I can kind of get them out of the way of my development, but then still be able to set all the rotation settings here independently. So its X, Y, and Z are now relative to its parents' X, Y, and Z. So like if I were to move this light to an X value of -2, it's -2X relative to where the stage light went up here. And the stage lights are also hanging out the same location as the camera. Anyway, so let's try to play with this light. Let's rename this so it has a more meaningful name than directional light. And I'm going to call it strong yellow light. And let's give it a rotation of, let's go look at the player so we can see how this works. An X value of 25. And a Y value of -125. So it's like kind of harsh on the side. But we're going to add other lights to kind of fill out the rest of the ship. But that way you have this kind of extreme yellow light that's just hitting the side of the ship like this. And the Z rotation is going to become 0. None of these other things I'm going to change. When I go down to light, I could change the light by clicking on the color. But I'm going to do that in a future one. Instead, I'll play with the intensity and increase the intensity to 1.2. You can see that that brightens up the ship a little bit. Indirect multiplier affects how like indirect lighting, so like reflecting off surfaces, but there is really no reflection, so it won't matter. We can leave the shadows to mostly the default. I don't feel the need to change any of these, and so this light would be done. Let's add another light. So I'm just going to deselect stage lights. So I'm just kind of clicking into the empty space of the hierarchy. And I'm going to go to game object, light. And then we can actually see the different types of lights that are available. We have the directional light, which serves as kind of a universal light. We have a point light, which serves as kind of like, if you would think of how a torch would work, it emanates light from a specific location. And as it moves, so like here's my my point light. So you can see as the point light moves, its lighting source kind of moves with it. So it's kind of like a torch. We're going to use point lights for different effects like lasers or my engines turning on. So they do have a use, but not for stage lighting. Then we've got spotlights. Kind of hard to see here, but a spotlight functions like you would think lights in a theater would work. It casts a beam of light down onto something, which does have pretty specific uses. So flashlights in games typically work as a spotlight. And area lights kind of function as practically like an ambient amount of light for something. We don't really use area lights for this project though. So we're going to drop in another directional light. I'm going to reset its position. I'm going to move it underneath stage lights. So notice that I'm dragging it and targeting it on the word stage lights and releasing. And now it's part of the stage lights parent object. And let's call this purple light. Let's make this a kind of strongish purple light. So rename purple light. Now I'm going to reset its Y to 0, so it's going to hang out up here with the other stage lights. So all of my stage lights are kind of up on the top of the world like this. The purple light I want to hit from the different side. I wonder if I can just turn this off. So there we go. And so I want to change this purple light to have an angle of 5 on the X and 120 on the Y. The Z can remain 0. But I want to change the color to be more of a purplish type of color. And so you could change this to match whatever background we end up using, but now I can kind of create kind of a spooky space looking lighting on the ship by using this purple directional light. And you can adjust the intensity to a level that you feel makes it look accurate. We can have it cast shadows too. So that light will make some light here. And now we've got a strong yellow light hitting the right side of the ship and a softer purple light hitting the left side of the ship. And I'm not going to change any of these other settings. So I'm happy with my purple light. And then let's add one more light. And this one's almost going to hit kind of the top down part of the ship that's looking darker to the other ones. And we're going to go back to game object, light, directional light. I'm going to reset its transform, and I'm going to drop it into the stage lights again. And I see that by resetting the transform, it kept its original position, and that's why it gave it the -10 in the Y here, because now it's relative to where the stage light object is, which is up here in the sky. So I'm going to set it back to 0, give it an X of 2, so all of my lights I can kind of see here. Kind of amusing that the one has more, oh, it has to do with its light baking. And so this one I'm going to adjust its angles. Let's give it an X of -15, a Y of 65, and no Z. This light, I'm gonna make it slightly yellowish, but not very. Something like that. But I have to be careful where I let it hit, and I don't want this intensity to be as strong as other ones, so I might drop its intensity down to like 0.4. And so now we can see the effects of this yellow light. It might be overpowering that purple light, but the whole point of this thing is to kind of fill out that region to give it a little bit of light there. And so the final rotation values, X of 15, a Y of 60, and a Z of -20 are the rotation values I'm going to use for this. I'm going to rename it from directional light to weak yellow light. Might make it more white-ish. And drop the intensity maybe to 0.3. So we've got a weaker color there so that you still get the purple light showing, but you have a little bit of lighting on there. So in practice, what this looks like is now I have a little bit more lighting on the ship as I move around. So if I still feel like these lights are overpowering like the purple light, I could always increase the intensity of the purple light. Oops, that's 4. I could always decrease the intensity of this. And so you can play with the lighting settings to get a type of lights that you want, but right now this looks good. I've kind of got a light bit of purple appearing under certain circumstances, and I've got different harsher or lighter effects happening as my ship moves around. And that will give me enough darkness that my lasers will illuminate objects rather well, and so will my engine. So we can always play with these more until you get some values that you like, but this should be enough to get us started and to get some settings that make it look slightly more dynamic than just only one light would do. Another idea is that based on the background you load, you might want to change the colors of these lights so that it matches. Like if you pick a blue background, purple lights may not make sense. But we're going to take a look at adding a background in the next video. And so thank you for watching.